Surah Al-Shams, by the way, is a close skin of Surah Al-Layl. Although Shams wa Duhaha, there is a broad consensus that it's Meccan Surah, and that the most reports say it was revealed after Surah Al-Qadr. إن أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر. Although there is a minority reports that say it was revealed right after Surah Al-Layl. Okay, والشمس وضحاها والقمر إذا تلاها والنهار إذا جلاها والليل إذا يغشاها. We already encountered the word created in us. We already encountered the word duha. And duha, as we said, although in Arabic duha can be used with different nuances, but it is at the point in which the sun is at its highest and the light of the sun shines most clearly. Some say it is the after the point where the sunlight breaks through. But for our purposes, we've already talked about Surah Al-Duha. But anyway, so Shams wa Duha. So the sun and brightness, or its brightness, and the moon إذا تلاها, that follows, or that follows it. There is an interesting point here. So I don't forget anything, let me turn to the right page. The most...
Oh, I guess...
What?
I was asking if Shams and Qamar are both grammatically feminine, but the Ha goes back to the Shams.
Right,
Yeah,
so the
okay,
Ha goes
okay,
back to
yeah,
Shams.
okay.
Why does Allah take an oath or invoke an oath? Allah is swearing by something in creation, and when Allah swears by something, Allah is alerting you to the importance of that part of creation. So level number one, as you know, our methodology, we always talk about levels of tafsir. So level number one was الشمس وضحاها والقمر إذا تلاها والنهار إذا جلاها والليل إذا يغشاها. Sun and light and the moon and the onset of darkness. So let me just go to the first translation. By the morning brightness and the night when still. Oh, that's interesting that they translated when the night when still is a talaha instead of. Yeah, okay. Oh no, I'm actually turned to the wrong surah. That's why the translation is wrong. Okay. By the sun and the morning brightness, by the moon when following it. Okay, that's right. By the day when disclosing it, and by the night when enshrouding. Thank you. Enshrouding. I'm not pronouncing it right. Enshrouding it. Okay. So we know that this is an obvious reference to the alternating polarity between darkness and light, the sun and the moon, and the role of the sun and the moon. The most interesting point here is when it says, when the moon that follows it, or when the day when disclosing it, or when the night when enshrouding it. What is the it? What is it referring to? And if this is where you get into some very interesting grammatical discussions that we don't need to pause at. But the gist of it is that from this, and here I brought the Arabic text because I thought some of you might be interested.
That's what I thought.
So قال الفراء المراد من هذا التلو هو أن القمر يأخذ الضوء من الشمس يقال فلان يتبع فلانا في كذا أي يأخذ منه. So the reason I brought the Arabic text is that I think it's really interesting that the medievals, this is Tafsir al-Razi that I read from, they, reflecting on these same verses, they extracted from it, by studying the structure of the language, that the moon takes its light from the sun. It's fascinating because, I mean, it's something that we know to be true today. And the precision of the Quran is the most fascinating thing. Why the grammar would lead you to that conclusion, that in fact the moon is not an independent source of light, which a lot of ancients used to think it is, but in fact only takes its light from the sun. We have also the same issue here in the word ma instead of man. So when Allah uses ma, so it is as if say, it is not by who created it, but by its creation. In other words, reflect upon its creation, the existence of that balance, the existence of the balance between the alternation, the polarity between light and darkness, guidance and misguidance, beauty and ugliness, wrong and right. This theme of polarity is a consistent theme in the Quranic revelation and alerting us to maintaining the conviction in the existence of this polarity. I mean, in our modern language, it is as if the Quran is warning us from the consequences of drifting with relativism, where you start believing, well, everything is relative, there's really nothing right or wrong, there's nothing really, there are only shades, everything are just shades. While this is sophistication in many situations, a sophisticated mind thinks in terms of shades. But it is very dangerous if it doesn't have boundaries and parameters. Because absolutes are not simply shades, but the logic of shades itself yields to the existence of absolutes, like guidance and misguidance, right and wrong, ugliness and opposite of ugliness, and so on and so forth. Okay, so am I forgetting anything here? Yeah, so okay, yeah. Then we go to the next level. When invoking, not just in the surah, but in several surah that are repeated thematically throughout the Quran, when invoking this the parable or the metaphor of the light and darkness. These, and like we saw in the previous surah, in fact, darkness is as if it is a constant danger, like deterioration and what was the word I'm looking for? When things, when something dies, it
Decomposes.
decay. Yeah, decay. That's the word I'm blanking out on. Like deterioration and decay. Light is an affirmative state. وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا. Light comes in to remove darkness. If you don't maintain the light, the darkness will set in again. Of course, the medievals would often give the example of if you don't affirmatively maintain the candle or the oil of the lamp, you only blame yourself if darkness comes in. In our day and age, I guess then it's, I'm still.
You have to pay that electric
Pay your
bill.
power bill?
Yeah, I'm still sour about the invention of electricity. I've never gotten over that, but it's okay. Maybe we just should stop paying the electric bill. Why not?
No video games though.
Yeah, no more ghost shows.
Okay, no more ghost shows. Yeah, okay, that's a problem. Okay, maybe I'm not that sour about the invention of electricity. Okay, so the polarity between the I mean, in the language here, فإن أهل العلم كانوا كالأموات في الليل فلما ظهر أثر الصبح في المشرق صار ذات so on. That the thinking of knowledge and thinking of the pursuit of knowledge of God's creation, understanding the wisdom, the as they say the hisabat, the mathematical equations in the alternation between sun and light is an affirmative step of removing the darkness. So the reason that the Islamic civilization became obsessed with knowledge was because the Quran itself underscored the importance of knowledge as a light, as an affirmative light against darkness, and the pursuit of that as a path to the divine. Something, of course, that way. وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا. The grammar here is fascinating, but to make a long story short, it is the reason that it is phrased in this particular grammatical way is that it refers to an absent object, something that is ghaib. How do you translate this? It's a masdar عائد على غائب.
What's that?
Source.
It's the way you
Also, there's a
Source?
infinitive. It's an infinitive or a verbal noun or gender.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
referring to not just to
فاعل مصدر.
huh?
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's referring to the removal of a state, of a condition. So it is a light that comes to the light that comes to remove the darkness from a state of darkness, rather than simply light that comes to shed or reflect upon the moon. So the grammar is structured to refer to sort of a immoral state. And when you look at the tafsirs, when they write about the astronomical references of sun and moon, it takes like one sentence. Then they go on for several paragraphs talking about the moral implications of that. The moral implications of that polarity between state of darkness and state of light, and the affirmative action that human being needs to take to remain within a state of light. Al-Amadi is very interesting because Al-Amadi, I didn't bring him with me, but Al-Amadi says that a state of light cannot be pursued unless human beings do what the prophets did في مجابهة الفراعنة والجبابرة والطغاة, in confronting despots, pharaohs, and the unjust. I just forgot to bring it. It's fascinating to me because, again, when you look at the way a lot of Muslims are today, especially the explosion of the Madkhali school and Jami school, which basically tells you, as a Muslim, the only thing you should do towards injustice is just patience, sabr, and then don't confront it, don't remove it, don't fight it. You contrast that, and they claim to be Ash'aris, which is, I mean, again, but anyway, enlightenment and the pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of justice are umbilically tied to the early Islamic revelation. Anyone that doesn't understand the extent to which is the Quran underscored and embedded in the Muslim intellect, the early Muslim intellect, that a state of enlightenment and a state of light, a state of, which is the state of goodness, or the state of husna, the state of beauty, is through the pursuit of affirmative social justice and the pursuit of knowledge, doesn't understand the Quranic message. Okay, can we move on from one line? Because I might forget anything. Okay, so we covered that. Yeah, okay, this is just for the there are always skeptics out there that listen to, and they think that I'm just inventing the stuff myself because they're idiots and ignorant. So here's the Arabic, for instance. فكان ذلك كالطريق إلى جذب العقل من حضيض عالم المحسوسات إلى يفاع عالم الربوبية وبيداء كبرياء الصمدية فسبحان من عظمت حكمته وكملت كلمته. Very, very beautiful, eloquent language that talks about the relationship of this metaphor to the sun, the moon, the light, the darkness, to the aql, to the intellect, and lifting the intellect from a state of decay and backwardness and reactionism to higher heights. In modern Islam, we rarely hear words like Kibriya al-Samadiyya, but it was very common in earlier Islam. Samadiyya is a state of elevation. Allahu Samad. So when we say Qul Allahu Ahad, Allahu Samad, Lam Yalid wa Lam Yulad, the most elevated. We human beings are called to follow a state of Samadiyya, a state of elevation. So it's like pursuing the attributes of divinity for us human beings, which I've referenced in the past. And okay. Okay, now we get to the shift. والسماء وما بناها والأرض وما طحاها. Remember the same thing about what we said about ma and man, but the, where's the translation? By the sky and the one who established it. Don't like it. Okay. وَالسَّمَاءَ وَمَا بَنَاهَا. Literally, the sky and that who constructed it, built it. Not just established it, but it is a constructed, built thing. Now, why is that important? Because in the pre-modern text, in the medieval text, they would say, subhanAllah, this is amazing. When Allah says that Allah upholds the sky, that there are pillars that uphold the sky, that Allah maintains the sky, perhaps our aqool, our reason, our intellects will someday understand the ways in which the sky is constructed. Now we understand that in fact our sky, the sky that surrounds the earth, is in fact very much constructed. In fact, it is constructed to an intricate balance. If anything, well, I mean, we're destroying the ozone, so we're unconstructing it because we're brilliant. But that's exactly the difference between the sky and who established it and the sky who constructed it. It is a built thing that, if you reflect on, you know that it must have a creator. وَالْأَرْضُ مَطَحَهَا. طَحْوُ الشَّيْء is the flattening or facilitating of something. So if you take dough and you want to make bread, so you beat the dough, that's a طَحْ. It's not طَحْن, that's a different word, it's طَحْ. And the earth is similarly constructed for your living. The earth could not have been the way it is geographically, just by coincidence, or by our modern language, by some type of evolution, self-maintaining, sustaining process. And from then the physical polarities to the shift to the most wondrous of creations, وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا. Let's see what. The soul and one who fashioned it. It's not really the soul. It is...
Self?
Huh?
The self?
Well, I mean, the translation says, by the soul and the one who fashioned it. And the Arabic is وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاها. So it's not... Nafs is soul, but it is also the consciousness. I mean, I actually like the word consciousness, because philosophers and scientists are still haven't solved, and in my humble opinion will not solve, the riddle of consciousness. We can understand that you can bring all these cells and put them together and that they will interact, but what makes the leap into consciousness? And what is consciousness? And you don't realize until you spend a lifetime reading philosophy how remarkably stunning consciousness is. Put it this way, what's the you and what's the me? What is the you and the me? Now, if you follow the message of the Quran, basically the answer to the puzzle of the riddle of consciousness is God. That the consciousness of the you and the me is maintained and preserved in the same way that the skies are maintained by a divine creator. If the divine creator is absent, the earth would explode into volcanoes or asteroids or comets, would become not fit for habitation. The skies would crumble and become unfit for habitation. But similarly, consciousness itself requires the affirmative engagement of the creator on a moment-to-moment basis. how many of you are philosophically inclined? I'm trying to measure. I mean, I've had people tell, in the past tell me, don't go into philosophy. You lose people that
No.
way.
Go there.
That's why people don't watch your videos.
No.
But I mean, consciousness is just endlessly fascinating. It is. They say that everything you need to build a human being exists in a handful of sand or dust, right? Well, I mean, we have. There was a British study done on what constitutes us as human beings. It was called. Any of you heard of this? Like they studied exactly what minerals and elements exist in a human body. The name of that study is skipping me. It was very famous. It was like they've written about it even in like National Geographics and anyway, we know that these billions and billions and billions of cells we understand that they're coded through DNA to, we don't really understand why some cells dedicate themselves into becoming your arm, while others dedicate themselves into becoming your eye. We don't really understand, but we understand. But all these cells put together don't equal consciousness. We bring cells together and we have them interact. And sometimes we can even manipulate the functionalities of cells. But we don't understand what then makes consciousness. And especially, there's Heidegger has when he was asked by his students to explain consciousness. So he said, okay, let's say you give me an orange. I peel this orange and I eat it. The experience in this fellow tasting the orange is so unique that it is not reproducible and you cannot describe it. There is no way for Heidegger to explain to you what it felt like in an ultimate absolute reality fashion to taste that orange. It is so particular and so unique. As unique as our fingerprints and our DNA. That's consciousness. You, as you experience things, even as you're hearing my words, the way you listen to a word or a sentence, or the way that you feel when you look at me, is so particular and so unique. You will struggle to put words to describe it, and whatever words you put to describe it will fail you. You will approximate, but you'll never actually perfectly describe. And you cannot reproduce it to another person. There's no, it is you, uniquely you. That is the riddle of consciousness. It is a wondrous thing that we don't, many philosophers have tried to write about that, and of course scientists have tried to explain consciousness. Now, of course, we get to another level of wonderment when I think of the consciousness of my dog, for instance, or Batuta or Luda, the two dogs that hang around me. And then I try to understand, when I give my leftovers from my plate to Batuta, I try to understand his feeling as he eats the stuff. And I struggle and I struggle and I can't. But what does it mean for this dog to have consciousness? how does he see the world? How does he understand the world? And then when they die, where does it go? Where do you go? That's, you know, you can I'll save you a very, very, very long journey. You can read so, you can see my philosophy section. I've spent about 10 years of my life just reading philosophy. I used to sit there with Hegel and turning these pages, and he's very difficult to understand.
Yeah.
And at the end, what they gave me is a more nuanced state of wonderment. That's it. The answer to consciousness, the Quran tells us, is Allah. It is that leap to the Creator, the one who is uncreated and not subject to the laws of consciousness, the one whose consciousness doesn't approximate or mimic or resemble anything we experience. Now, why is this important? It's important when we talk about the Surah, Wajhullah, the face of God or the hand of God. You cannot understand it in terms that come close to human terms. Okay, anyway, so we're still in service. Let me move on.
Take your time.
You're a bad influence, by the way. You know, you're a bad influence. She always says that, you know, every time, and then afterwards I always feel really bad that, you know, that's why, you know, of course, you know, you're all brilliant, that's why you're here. That's why all the not brilliant people don't watch the videos. It's because of your influence. I'm blaming you. It's your fault. It's not me, of course. Okay, so وَالْأَرْضُ وَمَا طَحَاهَا, and then this nafs. Now the Quran will alert us time and again as the entire rise of the Sufi movement, which had, of course, as you probably know, had a deep influence on Jewish mysticism and Christian mysticism. But the rise of Sufism, if you want to put your hand on where the genesis was, it was all the reflections upon the nafs, trying to understand the nafs and the introspection into the nafs, and if you want, I'm not sure, is the Rab al-Adawiyya translated? Do any of you know the poetry of Rab al-Adawiyya?
Yes, her poetry
Is?
Yeah, we have.
Some of the most amazing and insightful poetry in the nafs is by the Sufi Rab al-Adawiyya. It's very beautiful. Okay, وَنَفْسِ وَمَا سَوَاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Okay, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Most important, let's see how they translate it first. And inspired it as to what makes it iniquitous or reverent. No, not
I have
quite.
a translation.
What does it say?
And inspired it to know its own rebellion and piety.
That's closer, I think. فألهمها فجورها وتقواها. إفهامها وإعقالها أن ذلك حسن أو أن أحدهما حسن والآخر قبح. So the capacity is created in you to understand that something is husn, something is beautiful or good, and that something is not beautiful or ugly. Now, why did I pause at this for a second? Is that there is an old debate about this. When Allah says فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا, does أَلْهَمَهَا here mean تعليم وتعريف وتبيين? So, is it that Allah teaches a human being and instills in a human being what is good and evil, or does Allah instill the ability to know what is good or evil? Multiple choice, so either pick A, B, or C. Or that Allah inspires in you good and evil?
What do you mean by inspire?
Very good question.
And ilham is like the translation, to me at least, is like closer to inspired.
Okay, so that's precisely why someone like Al-Wahidi says, وهنا التعليم والتعريف والتبيين غير الإلهام التعليم والتعريف والتبيين غير والإلهام غير، فإن الإلهام هو أن يوقع الله في قلب العبد شيئا، وإذا أوقع في قلبه شيئا فقد ألزمه إياه. So here's the debate, that if ilham here is to inspire, we have a problem. When you do something evil, does it come from Allah, or does it come from the capacity, which is the capacity is a blessing that was created in you? If you say it comes from Allah, then think of someone who rapes and murders a child. Did that evil act, was it inspired in you by Allah? Those who said yes, obviously I disagree with very strongly. But they have a problem, because they also end up having to accept something like predestination, and having to accept, and in fact, the study Quran in a footnote sort of implies a position of predestination. That some people are created to go to heaven, and some people are created to go to hell. And as the study Quran actually, I don't know if I didn't mark it, but Iman, I instead of wasting time trying to find it, Iman goes to the report says, Iman goes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, O Prophet, Allah says, أَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا.
Sorry, that's the pizza guy.
That scared me.
All those ghosts.
Yeah, I thought of demons. As soon as I heard it, I said that sounds like the knocking of a demon. It's a very bony knock. Yeah.
Yeah.
No flesh on those bones.
The knocks you hear on ghost shows sound like that. Except that they're three knocks. They're all three knocks. Yeah. Or either one or three. So they're either Christians, so they knock three, or they're Muslims, so they knock one. Well, it's different, you know, it's a Muslim jinn or a Christian jinn. I'm joking. I do watch Ghost Soldier, but you know, because you're in the law school, don't go to the law school and say, you know, this guy is completely whack, he's insane. Your law professor is completely insane. He believes in the Muslim demons and Christian demons. Although if my wife would let me, I would go ghost hunting, but she would not allow it. She's afraid that I would come back as an attachment, which is a plausible fear.
She's right.
Yeah. You would, I mean, the possibility you come back as attachment is very high. I'm waiting for it. That's why I paused. I feel bad going ahead with her.
I was thinking about a break. Yeah.
What?
I was gonna ask, but I could probably wait till she comes back. Just a question.
What?
She's just signing for the pizza.
Okay, so it should be quick. Just take a breather for a second. Without going anywhere.
This is some theological
What?
stuff, man.
Why are you so fascinated with ghosts?
Don't worry, we'll have a Q&A.
Is that why are you so fascinated with ghosts? Like what informs that enthusiasm?
I'm fascinated by the reaction. I know what the pre-modern tradition, the way there's a lot of books like Kabrit al-Ahmar, the books on magic that was written by Muslims, and in fact the occult that moved to Europe in the 60s onward century, it came from largely the Muslim and secondarily the Jewish tradition. And the way that Jews and Muslims preserved the magic or the occult practices attributed to Solomon, Nabi Sulaiman. So I know what all I've read enough of this material to know when you hear knocking or you hear footsteps or you hear someone call your name or you see a replica of your son or daughter. I know what in the Jewish and Islamic tradition they say, and I also know what they say to do to fight that. But what fascinates me are the modern British and American, or Western bozos, because they have the technology to capture some of that, but they don't have the knowledge to understand any of that. So their interpretations are hilarious. I mean, they're like there's a show. This woman Amy, what is it called? The show. She's a psychic. And she's insane. I mean, the stuff she says is just so ignorant. And so for me, it's sort of a little bit of a comedy. If they would just humble themselves and read the tradition, even in the Jewish tradition, they would get it right. They would understand what they're encountering. But no one wants to bother with that. And it's all, of course, the modern occult movement that grew in the 17th century in Britain. Aleister Crowley and Madame Bovary and, this whole, and where the Wiccan religion was born from. And, so they get things half right, half wrong. Like everything in the modern world is appropriated and co-opted in very commercialized ways that are very fake and very cheap and very comical, if you know what they... It is entertaining but it's not entertaining if you actually believe it. If you actually watch it and then you actually accept what they're saying. Then I would say, don't do that because you're going to lead yourself into ways that you just...
Is there a book you would recommend from the...
don't read this stuff. I mean, you either study it properly with a sheikh in proper tutelage, or you don't touch it. Don't even touch it. Yeah. So no. The only time I'll tell you worry about that, if you get an infestation of jinn, then you bring someone like me to solve it for you, and you say thank you, and you don't even ask questions how or why. But no, this is something you don't read. This is something you need a sheikh to study with that trains you. Anyway, why did we get into this stuff?
Because of the pizza.
Oh, because of the knock. Okay, Grace, I'm gonna go on. Where did she go? Let's go. Okay, so فألهمها فجورها تقواها. This is an important theological issue in the entire Islamic tradition, because the debate as to you encounter a serious theological problem if God does more than inspire the ability. But so the most fascinating writing is, why did God inspire the ability? It is not because God revels in the possibility or the potentiality of evil. But the possibility for good would not have been possible without its opposite. In the same way we talk about the polarity, God could not have created the light unless also the darkness exists. So it is not, and in fact some say that evil is simply the absence of good, which is the position that Ibn Arabi and Mullah Sadra and so many different Muslim philosophers take. But that to share in the potentiality of the divine is capable of well-being and harm. the divine is capable of removing the darkness, of having darkness, and then removing the darkness through light. God gave you as a human being the blessing of the same possibility and potentiality. It's as if God, you partook or you participate in divinity. That is why, although modern theology you don't hear a lot about that, but I've written about it and published a lot about it in my own work. That is why your charge is to follow in the attributes of divinity. So among the attributes of divinity is rahmah, mercy, so so you in fact are charged with, it's as if, to put it bluntly, to try to become as divine as you possibly can in your lifetime. You pursue divinity. Now, the pursuit of divinity is a great blessing, but it's also a great responsibility. Because if you're capable of the great pursuit of divinity and attaining great heights in wilaya, in partaking in the attributes of divinity, you are also capable of a great fall. Everything is in a polarity, it and its opposite. And that's why Allah starts with the light and darkness and then comes to alert us, نَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. It is as if Allah is saying, look, the fujur is like the darkness and the taqwa is like the light. And this again, I'm just repeating what you find in all these. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. And that we're going to stop after these two. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. How did they? Indeed, he or she prospers who purifies it, and indeed he or she fails who obscures it. Note here that أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, tazkiyah is purify, but it is to zakki shay, you actively purify it. So if it's something is born pure, there's no tazkiyah. It is something that you affirmatively take steps to cleanse. So it is calling your attention to the affirmative action that is required. So a lot of theologians noted that it is very much like the affirmative energy of the sun. The moon doesn't have to do anything except receive the darkness. Doesn't have to do anything except receive the light of the sun. But where are all the tafa'ulat? Where are all the actual energy? It is in the production of light. Similarly, tazkiyah, it's an affirmative, dynamic process of, if you will, producing light. Now, وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا, the reason they translate it as obscure is because of the word dassa, which comes from dassa. Dassa shay means to like squash, push something under. Literally, it's like you push something under. In language, you could say dasastu jussa. Dasastu jussa means I buried it. I buried a corpse. I buried a body. But you don't say that unless you buried it deeply so that it's hidden. And so if you buried it superficially, less than 3 meters, then you can't say dasastu jussa. If you say dasastul amr, means I've hid the problem. I didn't solve it. I've hid it. So that's why they translate obscure. Perhaps, but it's not really obscures it. A more accurate translation, it would be degrades it. Who is it that prospers? The one who purifies the nafs. takes that consciousness the way it is and you purify it, you elevate it. And we learned from the previous surah that you believe in beauty, in ihsan, and in husna. And takzib al-husna is the opposite of light. That if you don't believe in beauty as even a possibility, as a potentiality. Now, what happens if you don't elevate that consciousness? It deteriorates. That is exactly when something falls apart to the point that you can no longer find, and this is what I'm heading to, is that the best thing I've read commenting as قَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا is that you can no longer find yourself. Yourself falls away, slips away from you. You didn't purify it, you didn't elevate it, till you no longer can locate yourself. You're of course conscious because you see, you hear, you taste, but you no longer understand what that consciousness is about. In our idiom, it's well captured by I'm lost. That's exactly the sa. That's the shit. When you say I'm lost, that's the nafs al-matsusa. It's lost. It had fallen. Let's stop here and then inshallah next halqa we'll finish the surah because we're going to move to Thamud by the oath of Thamud. Don't just listen to the tafsir. Live with the Quran. I remember that the companions, we have all these reports in which the companions would say that when we would receive a revelation from the Prophet ﷺ, we would all focus on practicing the surah or the ayah, depending on actually engaging it and practicing it before we move to the next. I wish we had anything close to that among our modern reality. It's easy to listen to all of this, and it's even easy to be moved by it the minute your consciousness, it's as if your consciousness, hears a long lost tune that is familiar to you. And you say, oh wow, yeah, I recognize this, and you react to it. But it's so easy, the minute you walk out and go on to the rest of life, that it all becomes distant and removed. And that's a nafs al-matsusa. You lose yourself in all the pursuits of existence without the anchor of the Quran. And either you believe you're going to be the worse for it, or you're going to be the better for it, either depending, or you don't. I mean, I guess that's what ultimately Iman is. It's either you really believe that without the Quran I am worse off, or if you don't have Iman, you say I can do without the Quran. And there's nothing then I can tell you to convince you that the Quran should be a part of your life. Because either you have the Iman or you don't. But if you do have the Iman, be serious about it. Okay, alhamdulillah, let's stop here and then we can, let's take 5 minute break and then you do Q&A.
Okay,
So whoever wants to leave can leave.
Pizza is here, so whoever is eating pizza, help yourself, and then it's fine to bring it in here. We can eat and do the Q&A.
Yeah.
So, okay. I'm gonna get some pizza.
Grace?
Yeah.
Everyone agreed that they really want me to go ghost hunting and buy ghost hunting equipment.
Does anybody volunteer to go with him? I'm not going.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll be on front.
You'll be at the front line?
Yes.
She just says that because she won't let, yes. She won't allow me.